However, if you are American listening to this, heralding the truth of democracy, I would remind you to read the Constitution. The framers were also not big on democracy. You look at the disconnect between the people and institutions via the Constitution, and that might be valid enough reason to say, well, it's time for a new Constitution. But if we believe in the existing Constitution, we have to trust that there is a disconnect between the masses of people and our democratic or democratic republican institutions. Welcome to Our Great Experiment. I'm Daniel Agamo. Today I have the privilege of being able to share with you a conversation I had with two brilliant political science scholars who also happen to be good friends and colleagues. Together we touch upon everything from the role and state of democracy around the globe, free expression on university campuses, the role of education, and a laundry list of other topics that I hope you'll find interesting. As always, we need guests. So if you have a topic or an issue that you're passionate about and you want to have a conversation about, I would love to feature you on Our Great Experiment. Our email is ourgreatexperiment2025@gmail.com. Bruna, Emily, it's good to see you both. How are we doing?
Very good. I actually just finished grading all of my American government stuff, so this is a good day.
Yeah, it's almost mid-semester, so you're surviving. I think it's survival mode. This is the goal, but very happy to be here.
The life of PhD scholars, nothing but workload, homework, grading. I applaud you both, and thank you so much for coming on. It means the world to me, and I'm happy to share your perspective with anyone listening. So you both are brilliant. You're PhD scholars in political science. And I want to open this by having a conversation about not only the field of political science, but also just academia in general. And I guess by starting, could each of you, you don't need to justify your study, but talk about what interests you. What interests you in political science? What topics are fascinating to you? Either of you can start.
Okay, I can start. Basically, I'm super interested in refugee rights and refugee politics. And really, I started getting more interested in refugee rights and refugee politics and all of that when I studied abroad in Denmark, would say like my junior year of college. So I think I was 20. And basically, it's like you're going from one Western country to another Western country, and you can compare how they are politically. And in your head, you think, oh, like Denmark, they have free healthcare and they love everyone and it's a welfare state. But then I got there and I saw they were super racist. And yeah, like if you were Muslim, they didn't really accept you as well. If you had different language differences, if you were Black. And so I was taking all these classes that was related to refugee rights, specifically like refugee law in Denmark. And I was like, why does this kind of suck? And that kind of got me really, really passionate about just refugee rights as a whole, but also in like Western nations where these refugees are fleeing for safety and they're not getting accepted at all. And it's really, really annoying. And so I want to initially, like, I got into academia and I applied for a PhD in hopes to like pursue a degree that will help me come up with like policy changes for refugee
Mhm.
integration. And we'll see where that goes in the future. But that's what I'm passionate about with politics.
Very adorable. Yeah, very nice topic. For me though, it's more reality based from where I'm from. So I study conflicted democracies. That means democracies are countries that are considered democracies, but their levels of violence are even higher than countries that are facing like civil wars or other types of conflict. Because it's counterintuitive if you think about it, like a democracy being as violent as a country that it's not as stable. And I'm from one of those countries, so I want to understand why that happens. What are the actors that are involved in that type of violence? So, police forces, military, drug cartels, militias, and I have this regional focus in Latin America, and I'm Brazilian, so I study a lot of my work is concentrated in Rio, São Paulo, and for me, it's personal. I grew up around a lot of violence, not directly towards me, but it was everywhere that I went. Perhaps not explicitly, but I knew it was there. So I was not, I don't have a major in political science, but I came to the US exactly because I felt that need to understand why this was happening. And I thought political science would be the best degree for me to do that. Um, yeah, I fell in love with the topic even more because it's personal, but now I have this academic interest that is very strong. And in the meantime, I also fell in love with teaching, with the experiences that I'm having with going to the classroom, talking about Latin America, talking about democracy, talking about politics. So yeah, hopefully I'll be able to also do some policy oriented type of work, but also promote knowledge through teaching because I think that's equally important in academia.
That's brilliant. I can just tell from listening to both of you how passionate you are about what you study and what you do. And I'm glad you mentioned teaching too, because I think in the world of academia, it's often undervalued just how much you can learn by teaching, whether that is A, through actually engaging with, you know, high level students, or just by B, when you teach, you have to think through your own process. You have to think through how to explain things, and that can really help you refine how you're arguing things, how you're thinking of things. So it's really interesting. I'm curious though, you both spend a large portion of your life in classrooms and seminars talking about politics, political discourse. In the real world, outside of academia, how often do you think about politics?
It's a
I
good
feel like
question.
a lot, like a lot. I mean, I think it's the case for anyone. We treat academia like it's our job. Most people, when they leave their job, they don't instantly shut off their brain and stop thinking about their job. So, like, we think about political science all day, every day because that's our job. And we go home, and on average, like, people already, they turn on the news, they open their phone, and there's going to be political stuff there anyways. So, you mix that with thinking about it as your job, and you're thinking about the things that you have to do the next day, the assignments that you have to do, the people you have to talk to. So to me, it's always on my mind. Even when I'm scrolling on Instagram looking at reels, it's always on my mind.
Yeah, I have a very like similar experience because I think that's especially challenging for us political scientists because in order to do research, you need to have ideas, and the way for you to have ideas is just thinking about politics. Of course, that's like doing literature review, all that very boring process that we all go through, but it's also watching the news and observing what is going on out there, what doesn't really seem right, or questions that perhaps academics didn't really explore so far. So yeah, it's all the time, and if it's not necessarily interest like related to my research, it's something else. So for example, now a lot is going on in Brazilian politics that are not related to my research at all, but I'm always there. Like I'm always consumed in that, and it can be overwhelming for sure because we don't have that break that people that do something else usually get. They have the privilege to turn it off if they want to. We don't. It's all the time.
And also, it doesn't help that all of our friends are also political science, or at least political science adjacent. So even when we go out for drinks or have movie nights, we're still talking about politics.
That's something that extends to family too. I think, once you have a doctor in the family, everyone will go to you and talk about like what is wrong with their health. But when you're a political scientist, everyone thinks that you know everything about politics. So they will come to you to ask for your opinion on things. Sometimes you're like, I have no idea. Like, why are you asking me? but you become this like reference for what is going on in, I don't know, like Turkey or Suriname or, everything. And it can be challenging to control that.
There's no icebreaker quite like, what's your perspective on the state of global affairs? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
I
in
always get, well, are you gonna be like president one day? Like,
I got lawyer. Are you going to be a lawyer?
Yeah.
At least in undergrad. But when you think of all the work that goes into this scholarship, people in PhD programs spend hours upon hours upon hours sifting through existing scholarly work to try to build off of it. What's the audience, right? Try to like paint this picture for me. Who's reading, you know, for someone focused in American politics, the APSR, or an international journal in political science? Who's reading these publications?
No one?
Harsh.
Um, it's a reality that we need to accept. Um, and I think this is one of my main critiques to the state of academia now. Um, we are becoming more statisticians than actual social researchers. Um, our research is becoming so challenging for people that are not used to the language that we use to read it and consume it. So in the past, a lot of political scientists would, of course, publish in these papers and do all of that, but they will also transform their research into books that anyone could actually buy and read it with more like a historical perspective. I read a paper a couple weeks ago for a class where in the 70s and 80s, political scientist books would be with the president, like the president would use that to learn about like how people think about politics. We don't do that anymore, just because we are so focused on numbers. And this is a shift in political science that started around the 90s. Um, and we are so focused in like we need to show that our arguments are correct in terms of statistics, that we are overcomplicating things and we are not talking to the normal population anymore. We are not sharing our findings with our neighbors, with our friends that are not from political science, because it becomes so complicated. And that's the effect of that, is like no one really reads it. Because for you to read a paper, you need to have like your topic needs to interest someone else, and that's already something complicated because we tend to focus so much in one specific thing. So like Emily does research on refugees, but it's probably something very, very like zooming in something very specific. So someone else also need to be interested in what Emily does to go and like, oh, there's someone else out there that already did some research similar to what I want to study. So the process is super complicated. And in the end, for us that are like we are starting now, we hear a lot from people that we just need to be open to this idea that people are not going to really read it. And it's a shame, really.
yeah, I agree. It's just gonna be that, like, the 2 or 3 niche authors that are gonna be reading the same thing as you, maybe, like, the journals and all the, like, the peer reviewers that need to read for a journal, and that's really it. That's all that's gonna read it, and there's a huge disconnect between the researchers and I think the public as a whole, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah, I don't bring this up to discourage anyone from pursuing a life in academia or research because no one's going to read it. That's not why I asked this question. The reason I think it's worthwhile to conversate on is because if scholarly work is finding problems within society, institutions, voting behavior, whatever, right? If it's identifying things that are going on, trends, would it not be useful for the public sphere, for voters, for politicians, legislators, to know that information, or at least have that information explained accessibly to them?
Yeah, it would. I
Yeah.
think that professors and academics as a whole need to work harder to connect with like nonprofits, NGOs, IGOs, community-based projects, like policymakers in general. And I think that at least in my program specifically, it might be different in other academic programs. I think that we tend to ignore policy a lot and focus more on statistics, which doesn't matter.
Yeah. And not even just that. I think it's theory. We don't focus on like how to build a big,
Mm,
important, life-changing theory anymore. Because we believe that, oh, the good theories, they already did that in the past century. Like, um, but I honestly think we need to go back and like write more books. I think people need to go back to like having their own blogs and writing stuff in there so anyone on online can get some knowledge. I know that the big names like Fukuyama, for example, they all have
mm.
like this personal website that you can go and check what they think about, something that happened with a political science hat and like perspective. We as a field, we don't do that. We keep it in our like offices, like everything, like with some very depressing music on and like just fighting with R, like, oh, why my code isn't working? Like, is that really helpful for like society, broadly speaking? Are we doing something that it's gonna be worth like all this training for 5 years? I think this is a critique that it's worth mentioning, and I think people should be paying more attention to it, honestly.
And you have to think, like, what are the things that got us interested in politics? It's not some obscure research article from like
Mhm.
50 years ago that has like a p-value of like 0.003 and it's all great. Like, the thing that got us interested is like movies and books and podcasts and like blogs. And these are the things that I think other people need to consume to have a deeper understanding of politics.
I'm really glad that both of you just touched on this. And maybe one final question on this subject. Do you think the reason why we're seeing more of an emphasis on methods, mathematics, stats in modern political science research is simply because scholars think there's nothing new under the sun, right? There's no new rock to be turned over of this great theory that explains you know, some process going on in the US, in another country, in global politics. And do you think that's accurate?
I think it can be one of the reasons. I also think along with that, does allow us to become kind of lazy when it comes to actually formatting new theories. Because if you look, there's new stuff, even like the refugee literature, and I know that Emily can talk more about that, but it's recently new. The feminist approach to international relations. You have different types of conflict, like the conflicted democracies literature, something new. So we do have interesting stuff, but I think when we rely on statistics, that takes the attention out of the theory per se and puts on the results. So even if your theory is a little bit like, like it's a mid, like it's a six. If you have a bunch of key values, like a lot of stars that are important, you can get away with that sometimes. So I think it makes us a little bit like lazy, and that's incredibly problematic to me. Just because sometimes you go to conferences and you see professors talking about it, they have no idea what they're talking about because it's just a bunch of equations and machine learning and all sorts of things. And we're like, okay, but what is where are the politics here? I don't see it. It's so hard for me to understand. And it feels like for you to be a good political science nowadays, you need to be also like really good at this very hard techniques. But then in the theory, nothing really exciting is coming up, at least not broadly speaking. We don't have that. And I mean, you can correct me, you're in a different program than what I am. But there's not this idea that we need to push to like actually study inference, how to make causal inference, how to formulate a good theory. We don't have that anymore. Um, so we're just becoming lazy.
I think also just to kind of give like professors in modern day academia the benefit of the doubt. But I mean, the goal is to get tenure. The goal is to publish research papers. And to reach that goal, you need to publish a certain amount of papers.
Yeah.
And journals want to have papers that have results, like have interesting results. And in order to do that, that means like having these p values and certain, and I don't know, these sophisticated methodologies. And I think honestly, it's not just an issue with maybe like, I don't think it's really an issue with the academics themselves, but it's
Hmm.
an issue with the system of, like, schools, like public
Mm.
universities, because they have to have a certain amount of publications to get money, and it's also an issue with journals because journals don't care about, like, how unique maybe this theory is, they care more about the actual findings, so
This is not a single faculty, a single department problem. I think it's the system that pushes us to do that, because otherwise it will be just one department or a few departments. But it's something that you actually see across like the whole country, and just how political science works here. And then you do have a lot of good people that do qualitative research, but they also say how hard it is for them to get published, just like Emily said, because you have these journals that are just pushing for these fancy methodologies and these very complex models. And then the people that are actually going to the field and talking to humans to understand their mind and that guide this political process, they don't have the same space that we do. And this is a type of problem that social scientists are discussing since the early 2000s, and we are still talking about the same thing. It's something that it's a cycle, and I don't know where this is gonna lead us, but it's a problem in academia for sure.
One thing you said that I strongly connected to was where are the politics? I remember sitting in seminar discussing legislative professionalism, and we talked about everything but legislative professionalism. And I found that interesting. And it's also an interesting incentive because at large research universities, obviously the incentive is to publish good quantitative work with good methods, right? And so you might think, well, at the more liberal arts teaching colleges level, you might be freed up to do more theoretical work. The problem is, what's the incentive there? Teach. I've spoken to teaching professors before. Maybe 5% of their job is research. Maybe. Because they don't have time. Their workload is crazy. So, interesting conversation. I know both of you are brilliant, and maybe you can be a part of some change in the field to include uh, more theoretical perspectives. And once we reach the mountaintop of stats, of methods, maybe then we'll start to see a move towards better theory, which I know both of you are more than capable and passionate on. But I want to move this conversation into more of a broad perspective, just thinking about the future, not just as political scientists, but also as citizens of the world, right? Are you left hopeful at the end of the day when you lay your head down for rest and you think about the future? Are you hopeful for global outlook right now?
No. No. Um, and this is a global perspective. I think there are a lot of factors that make me believe that things are gonna get more difficult. And I'm not even talking just about like political systems, oh, democracy, safe. I'm not even talking about that, but we are talking about climate change. That is something that we need to consider, and that makes me feel very uncertain about what my future is going to look like when I get old, what my children's future once I get like children. Are they even going to have like a nice environment to live in? Economics, like we are struggling not only in the US, but as a Brazilian, like the perspectives for someone our age to get a house, to buy a car, to go on trips, even if you have a good job, you're gonna struggle. So in terms of economics and as grad students, we know it's hard for you to get perspective on what your future is gonna look like. And I think also going to the politics a little bit, I think people are incredibly angry about everything. not only politics but everything. Everyone is upset, frustrated with everything that is going on. And I think that makes the process for you to be positive about things a little bit more complicated, because you have so much to be pissed off about. You have not a lot to be hopeful. And I think that's a process that our generation it's struggling to find where's exactly the best point for you to be. So yeah, not really.
I am in 100% agreement with Bruna. I think it's really, really difficult for me to find, I guess, like hope in the world and for democracy. Um, yeah, I think it's the world is very sad right now, but I want to be really optimistic about things because I think that the second that we all give up hope on the future, then hope is like the future is going to end for real, for real. So, I think that maybe as like a younger generation, like we need to work harder on being optimistic about the future because if we think that the change can happen, then the change can happen. And that's something I need to get better at too, because it's so like I wake up in the morning and I pick up my phone and I see, you know, wars and genocides and a bomb somewhere and terror. Like, I don't know, like the world is just very sad. And, but then again, like we're also some of us are like at a place of privilege where we don't have to worry about these things. And so I think that it's important for us to like take a step back and be like, well, things are shit right now, but it can get better, hopefully.
I can't say that my perspective would differ that greatly from either of yours, which is not a comforting thought. When I think about the challenges we already face versus the challenges that are yet to come, specifically artificial intelligence, for example, right? How the drive towards changing technology is going to encourage state actors and countries to be more aggressive in protecting those assets, to accumulate their own artificial intelligence resources, or even something as basic as water, right? As fresh water becomes more scarce, how do countries become more aggressive to protect their reserves? It's terrifying. But there are people listening to this who are already aware of that, right? Maybe they share this perspective that the world is dreary right now and there's not that much hope. So, maybe to put you both on the spot with a very difficult question, is there one thing you could point to, whether it's in one country, on the global scale, at any level, one thing that gives you hope?
I mean, recently in Nepal, they like really accomplished something really big. They basically had a very authoritarian, I think, what prime minister, and then they yeah, Gen Z rose up and it was really impressive. I mean, a bunch of people died and there was like the protest was not peaceful in any way and it was kind of a but like to me it just shows that young people can rise above, you know, in some ways. So moderately hopeful, but also knowing that it was on the back of lots of pain.
Yeah, I don't. I think projects like fun makes me hopeful in a way. Just as like civil society uniting to talk and listen to each other is something that I feel like it's missing. We're becoming extremely isolated, and of course, there's technology involved in that. There are other factors, but I think it's important for us to value like initiatives that connect people and make them people like sit and talk to each other. I think that's such an important part of being a human being. And like things like this, they make me very, very hopeful that there are people out there that are willing to sit down with you and like brainstorm and think of ways for you to be better, have more respect, and even encourage each other to move on, and even with all the negatives to just go forward.
Yeah, one thing I'm reminded at in times like these is that if you only judge a country or the world via how you interact with it on social media, you'll be left with a very dreary perspective of that location. But what gives me hope is that talking to people in real life is so much different. It's wildly more hopeful, wildly more compromising than the online realm. And I think that's just simply down to, well, if I actually have to communicate with you in person, there's a face behind the opinion, right?
Mhm.
I see you as a human being. You're one of my fellow citizens of the world. I actually have to respect you for the most people, I think like that. Whereas on Twitter or on TikTok or whatever platform, it's just so easy to leave hateful comments that try to, further tear us apart instead of trying to build us together. Because I think this is a widely observed fact of life. It is much easier to tear things down than to build new, promising things. So I think we can all be a part of that in our day to day life. On a final note, kind of an international politics specifically, the field of international relations has made a big deal about the state of democracy for decades now, right? You go back to the end of the Cold War, the end, what is it, Fukuyama's, um, the end of, the name is blanking me, right? But this concept of democracy has been at the forefront of IR for many decades. Recently, trends in de-democratization and democratic backsliding have kind of rose to the forefront and as one of the largest topics in the field. How do you see that process? Like when you look at global democracy, how would you judge the health of it?
Uh,
Generally bad.
Please
I
elaborate.
yeah, yeah, Emily, go. I have a lot of thoughts, so you go
I
for it.
I mean, Dan, you kind of covered it pretty well. Like democratic backsliding is, I feel like, one of the topics that you would want to get in as an academic scholar right now because um there's just a lot of research going on for it. You can look at like what Hungary, like a perfect example of democratic backsliding, and Western states aren't really like free of it. Like here in the US, we're not free of that either. So even like Britain and with Brexit, huge right-wing populist movements are coming everywhere. I just recently worked on a paper about Germany and right-wing populist voting in Germany, France even. So like all these huge, like well-known Western states that are supposed to be like the prime example of democracy, are not free from democratic backsliding. And I think that that's just an example of how worldwide the health of democracy is really bad and, the needs of the people aren't being met at all. And I think once governments start focusing on the needs of the people, here in the US included, then democracy in the world would be 10 times better. But that's not the case.
Yeah, if there's something that I'm perhaps a little bit more positive about, maybe that's the topic. But I'm biased, of course, because my country, and this is one of the few things that I can be proud of in the last few years. But Brazil, it's facing a very important political moment now in terms of um, reinforcing our institutions and our democracy, and actually talking and bringing people in this discussion that there is consequences for those who try to attack our democracy and take it down. Very historical. Brazil is a recently new democracy. We transitioned from dictatorship in the 1985, so it's honestly like there's not a lot. 40 years. It's very new, and the fact that we are able to do that, and most of the people, I think, the last public opinion poll that checked on if you agree with what's going on or not, that it's the trial of our former president and a bunch of military officials. Like I think it's somewhat around 56, 57% of the population support. Um, these efforts to hold them accountable. So yeah, I'm actually very proud of that, and I think we're sending a signal to the world that if you do unite and you reinforce your institutions, um, you reinforce those institutions and then you bring people to the debate, then yeah, there's hope for you to hold democracy and keep it stable and keep it functioning. I think what Western civilizations are, and when I say Western, Brazil is Western, but I'm saying more North and South. It's the North had been so stable during so long, and I think now that you're seeing some type of shift in that equilibrium, everyone is panicking. Like, what should we do? Because that, even though we had tensions in the past, it was never so severe. And then you panic. But then when you have a country like me that went through like 100 military dictatorships and tried like attempts of coup and all of that, you the fact that we are being able to show to people that institutions are the reason for democracy to work, I think it's a good sign that actually the North should look at down a little bit to Brazil and like learn what we did right and replicate this for you to keep, if this is the intention, to keep democracy stable and functioning.
Yeah, that both of you really interesting thoughts. I'm curious, kind of thinking about this concept of people taking democracy in the northern Western world for granted for so many years because of its stability and disruption in the past couple of decades. What do you think a world with a non democratic, maybe that's not the right term, but a lesser democratic northern Western world looks like?
I have hot takes, Emily, so if you want to.
No, I'm interested to hear what you have to say. I don't have a clear answer to this question, so I want to hear your.
First of all, before all of that, I'm gonna say I'm a I'm a defender of democracy. Okay, so I believe in democracy. I'm not opposed. I'm not here advocating for dictatorships or authoritarian regimes. But and this is putting my political science hat again. In a way, we need to think about it. Is democracy the best regime that, as a society, we can come up with? Because democracy is recently new. Like it wasn't out there forever. Like people would organize in different types of systems. So I think it's when someone questions, like, is this the best way that we can organize ourselves? I think this is a valid question. There are some people that do research on, for example, like developing countries, and again, this is a hot take, but I have the sources, so this is not me just there are some studies that show that authoritarian regimes are actually better for developing countries because of stability, because you have just more leaders, so you won't have like policy change, and in the long term for economic reasons, and we're taking like civil rights out of the picture. But I think like this is a valid question to ask. Like, what is the best type of organization for us? And sometimes I feel like people are too scared to ask that question because we have this passion for democracy. But if we want to make something better, perhaps it's not going to look exactly the way it looks now. Um, and I think maybe it isn't. Maybe democracy isn't the best model. Yeah, because I like to think, even if I'm a pessimistic, I'm like, it must be like something better out there that we just didn't come up with yet. And sometimes even politicians, they're so scared of bringing that up because of the repercussions that that's going to have, that we don't even discuss it anymore. So we are stuck in this cycle of like, this is what we have and this is what we are going to have to work with. Um,
And I think, like, low key, that just goes back to our discussion about, like, the flaws of academia because, like, since the, like, political science as a whole was built on Western white people. And so you think about, like, democracy and the studying of democracy was built on, British scholars and like, early American scholars, and like, that does not really leave space for, looking at new democracies and authoritarian regimes and all of that because really, like, political science was built on looking at democracy being the best and democracy being the only, and I think recent political science is getting better at, like, acknowledging different regime types and, like, studying those, but it for sure can get better and not, like, putting democracy on a pedestal.
Yeah, and just add on that, I think it's valid to ask, and again, this is like going out there and talking to people. Like, do you really feel that democracy represents you? Like your interests, your vote, it's being acknowledged and you're being represented out there? For me, I don't feel like that all the time. I feel like my vote is just another vote and my interests are not being promoted, even in the candidates that I voted for that are supposedly like required to be out there defending what I voted for, and they promised me that they would do. I think that's a limitation of democracy, the way that it is. Perhaps in the U.S., and you too can talk more about that. But certainly in Brazil, is there a way for us to be better at that? People say adding referendums, it's super complicated. Is it? Perhaps we should start talking about it, actually asking people what they want and ask them to vote for it. I don't know. I think we should be asking this.
This might be a shocking conversation to some listening, right? And I want to emphasize the purpose of this platform is to emphasize that nothing is above questioning, right? Even things that we hold as universal truths are still worth questioning and conversating on because that's how you find absolute or approximate absolute truth, right? And specifically focused on the United States from my perspective, right? There's a piece from 1957 by Anthony Downs, who came from the economic scholarly work. And he essentially concluded in 1957 that because the United States was such a vast country with millions of people, now we're in between 300 and 400 million, you're actually better off not voting. Now, Downs wasn't advocating for people not to vote, but what he was writing is that the cost of information, in other words, the cost that people have to spend to acquire political information to vote, is actually greater than the utility of their vote, which can call into question how important is one's vote. Now, let me preface this by saying I'm not saying I'm against democracy or pro democracy, right? I am simply an arbiter. However, if you are American listening to this, heralding the truth of democracy, I would remind you to read the Constitution. The framers were also not big on democracy. You look at the disconnect between the people and institutions via the Constitution, and that might be valid enough reason to say, well, it's time for a new constitution. But if we believe in the existing constitution, we have to trust that there is a disconnect between the masses of people and our democratic or democratic republican institutions. Maybe on one final note about international relations, when we think of the core tenets of the Western world, right, or at least how it's been argued many times before, right, the tenets of equality before the law, right, the freedom of speech, the freedom of practicing of religion, right, how strong are those institutions, just from your individual judgment? Because it's one thing, I apologize, I'm talking too much, but it's one thing to talk about, well, how strong is the US Congress, right? But it's another thing to talk about these core institutions that we value as part of our everyday life, like the ability to practice your religion freely or the freedom of the press, the equality under the law.
Yeah. I think you're gonna have to cut this because I'm like dying with Emily's cat in there.
I'm so sorry. I tried to push her away.
That's like the worst part because I just see like a cat, like I am like pushing the cat. But,
I think my perspective is going to be very similar to my last answer about like democratic backsliding, but I will preface that's because I'm a white American from a Western nation where like we've had these freedoms for a relatively long time. And so that's the perspective that I'm, like, going in from. So, like, you'll see I feel like in media and stuff, like, you see, them trying to do social media bans, like, that was the big thing that was happening in Nepal, and, so because of things like that, I think there's limited freedom of press, limited freedom of speech that's been going around a lot in the Western world, at least. So, yeah, I don't think these individual rights are being met as they should be in terms of, like, equality and, like, freedoms, but that's just my personal opinion from my perspective.
Yeah, I agree, and I think sometimes we talk so much about human rights, and we forget what the idea of human rights actually mean. In democracies, in theory, you would expect that human rights would be respected. But for example, my topic of study, I study conflicted democracies. You have a system that functions. People go and vote for a president every 4 years. It's a fair system. There's no fraud, but still, a lot of people are dying for police brutality. A lot of people are dying because there's a drug cartel in your neighborhood and a kid, had access to a gun that he wasn't supposed to. He's not going to school, and he decides to kill you just because. Is that the way that a democracy should function? Is that I think we focus too much on broader things when we are talking about human rights, but when you look at food insecurity, people that have access to, basic resources, water, all of that, electricity. I know that this is hard for people perhaps in the US and Europe to think about, but this is discussions that we do have in the global south. Like there's a lot of people out there that don't have access to water. They don't have electricity. This is, at least on my understanding, this is a human rights violation. This is a way for the government to fail their citizens and their voters and all of that. So, and as a consequence, you have this cycle of a lot of things that are not fair. And then you have also, in terms of free speech, to me, it's a violation of free speech if one voter is more valuable than the other. I think that's one of the many many ways that we are seeing on free speech being violated. So I think it's easy for us to focus on the big things like what's in the news. But I think if we do this exercise of reflecting and looking around, you're going to see a lot of things that in the system that we live in, they're not functioning the way that they were supposed to. Again, we are not saying here like, oh, democracy doesn't work. Let's flip the page and move to something else. But the only way, for me at least, for us to find a solution on how to get better is to criticize it. So
Hmm.
actually acknowledging there's some things that are not working here. How can we move on from it and make it better? Um, and perhaps you're going to be a little bit more depressed because you're going to start seeing a lot of, very wrong things around you that are happening all the time. But I think this is our job to like human evolution. I think that's how we move as this is category of, living beings.
And I think the fact that, like, the international system as a whole thinks that the way to fix these human rights problems is democracy, like, that's where our issue is. And I personally don't think that fixing these like, if there is even is fixing human rights, but I don't think that fixing these problems is gonna come from the top down. It's gonna come from the bottom up, like, the people on the ground who are trying to help other people with their health, getting food access, um, yeah, helping refugees, like I say, like, the people that truly help refugees are the people that work with refugees on the ground. Like, that's where the meaningful impact is gonna come. So, working from the top down isn't gonna change anything, in my perspective.
Yeah, like our kids having good quality education. For me, for example, when I was studying in high school, my school we didn't have a math teacher just because they just didn't hire anyone. So when we were supposed to have math class, we were just out there playing soccer, doing nothing because we didn't have a teacher. That's a human rights violation to me. I was supposed to be in the classroom studying. I didn't have that. They took it out from like what other kids were having that opportunity. I didn't. But my parents, they were being Texas. Like they were doing everything that according to the system that we were living in, they were supposed to do. But what was coming back to us was not what we agreed in this system that democracy is. So to me, it's time for us to have like a deep down conversation with ourselves and see that if this is really what we want moving forward.
Yeah, the concept of questioning things to improve them, right, makes me think of John Stuart Mill, right? The philosopher who argued that, right, you take one set of ideas and you clash them with another and you eventually get a synthesis, right, or an end result where you're better off, right, because ideas were challenged and the end result was something better off, which I guess is a good segue into, maybe the final big topic I want to touch upon. All three of us have spent and are currently spending time on university campuses, right? Which are usually known as a hotbed of ideas and ways to express yourselves and challenge your own preconceived ideas. And there's an organization that I will probably plug in nearly every conversation that I have on this platform. It's called FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. It's a nonpartisan group. A lot of them are lawyers, and they help advocate for free speech issues. And in 2025, they released their annual survey of the state of American universities and free speech. And they surveyed over 58,000 students, large sample size. And of course, they found a highly a high imbalance of ideological perspectives on college campuses, which was nothing new. That was something they expected. They surveyed 257 schools, and I just want to share a couple interesting thoughts that they found from their survey. The first thing of note is that they found only 42% of students who responded to the survey feel that the administration at the university does a somewhat good job or a good job of protecting free speech. 42%. 24% said not at all, right? So a quarter of respondents said no, not at all. And one of the last interesting things they found was that only 50%, one out of every two students, feel that they can disagree in a classroom. One out of every two feel that they can speak out when someone says something that they don't personally agree with. Surprisingly, that number is only lower on social media, which I thought was interesting. But on a positive note, they did find in their 2025 survey that the rate of self-censorship was in decline. So people being afraid to say something, just holding it in, that declined. Yet at the same time, the rate of students who thought it was appropriate to shout down speakers, block students from entering a speech event, or even rising to committing an act of violence, those all rose in 2025. Now, I just gave you a laundry list of items they found in their survey. I recommend anyone listening go check it out. But kind of taking those findings into consideration, holding them at the back of your mind, I want to talk about your lived experience. Through your experience on college campuses, do you feel that universities are still a place for open dialogue?
I am just going to say that I think the answer between Bruna and I will probably be very, very, very different because I am a born and bred white American. I there's for no reason would I ever feel like there's some sort of danger to me voicing my opinion at all. So that is one thing. Another thing is I feel like honestly, because America as a whole is so like split, it's really, really difficult for political conversations to happen at all. So even if like people feel as if there's a space for to have like a conversation about political discussions, I think it's like there's a space for one side and there's a space for another side, and they're not necessarily combining. So sure, like I have no problem voicing my political opinion, but I have no problem voicing my political opinion on campus because I'm surrounded by people who agree with me. So, I think that's how it is here, at least in not it as a white American here where I'm living currently, like, I don't have any issues or any problems with political dialogue or expression on campus, but I think we've already established that the campus that I'm at right now is pretty mid. So, um, I think that there's other campuses that where this, like, political dialogue and free expression and stuff is a much bigger issue.
Yeah. Um, I feel like for me, I never felt necessarily in dangerous, like in a position that I would have to in danger on campus, in a position where I would have to control exactly word by word of like what I'm talking about. But on the bigger note, like thinking about university as a whole, I've been and I've witnessed occasions where students would punish others with eyes, with whispering. Like I saw that happen on multiple occasions, and I think a couple like Emily was there with me on like you were saying something that I don't agree and it's offensive to me, even if it's something just on the other side of like the spectrum of the political spectrum. I saw that happen in like multiple occasions. And I feel like once that turns to be acceptable, so I was actually on campus during like election times, and you feel it, you know it's there, and you know that you're not supposed to say certain things in front of certain people because they're going to get super offended personally, and they're going to react in a way that it's not really appropriate for an academic environment. And this is in the graduate level. So I think for undergrads that are younger, they don't tend to like filter what they say as, nicely as we often try to do. I think this can get even like worse. Um, so I do think it's a problem in universities. And honestly, we need to acknowledge that and find ways to make that better. There's certain group of people that don't feel comfortable sharing their opinions because they do think they're going to get punished for it. I'm not talking about one specific subject. I'm just or not a one specific political group. I think it's often happens in who do you support as a party, but it also happens in what do you think about the economy? What do you think about hot topics like abortion? What do you think about, should we raise the minimum wage or not? I don't know, like anything. But you do feel like this dark cloud under universities that there's right and wrong. And if you're on the wrong side, you're not supposed to talk about it. That's to me extremely detrimental to the purpose of an education. That doesn't mean you can say you can be disrespectful to others. There's a clear difference here to me, at least. There's a difference when you expressing your views without, um, you know, being aggressive, being violent towards others. And that's why we have rules in universities to avoid that from happening. And those rules, they were supposed to work, and I saw them working. They're there for a reason. And at the same time, you would expect from others to be willing to listen to what students that don't agree with them are saying. Because the purpose of education is for you to have contact, to be in contact with different perspectives, people from different countries, different states, different religions, different political, in the political spectrum. And that's how you learn because you're going to think, oh, I see that, and I see that dot. I think it's red, and then someone sitting next to you will be like, "No, but I see it orange." And then someone will say, "Wow, I see it blue." And then instead of fighting against each other and be like, "Wow, you're stupid. You shouldn't be here," you try to understand why is that, like, why someone is seeing it different. Perhaps you're going to continue not agreeing with that person, but at least you gave that person the space for them to talk about it. I don't see that happening now. Honestly, it's something that annoys me. And every single day that I go to my training to become a teacher, I feel like, how can I make this better? How can, like, as someone that is being trained to be a teacher, how can I make the space of my classroom welcoming for everyone? It's a challenge, I know it is, but it should be more coming from top down in terms of like university policies, sending to faculty, because it's not also, and I'm yapping too much, but it's
No,
not
please.
it's not only on faculty. Like faculty are busy, they have so much to do, and of course there are certain cases that are problematic. But I do think that faculty, at least the faculty that I came across, are actually willing to talk to all sorts of students. I think it's more like an environment problem and not just like people that are up there teaching. I think it's the environment. So once you have policies that open that space for everyone, I think this will get better. It's tricky, but I do think that it's, if we're talking about freedom of speech in college campuses, it should be freedom of speech for everyone, really.
I
I
also
also
think
think
that you were talking about, like, what you wanna do, like, as a teacher, and I do think that I feel like all of us, considering we're at what, like, 3rd, 4th year grad school, 2nd, 3rd, whatever, we've all experienced professors that are honestly, like, horrible teachers. Like, you can be a professor and be a really bad teacher, and that's because professors are taught to do research. Professors are taught in, like, one niche subject. They're not necessarily taught to teach a younger generation, especially at, like, higher, like, research one institutions where they don't really care about teaching. And I think that it's really important for professors to be passionate about teaching, to be passionate about freedom of speech and, like, educational and academic debates, and if that's not present in the classroom, then the students are gonna pick up on that really, really easily.
Yeah, one question that I like to ask everyone, and I think it segues well from this conversation. That's why I ask it now, because I think it'll only build off of what we're talking about. I ask everyone who comes on this platform, what's one thing that they're doing in their day to day life that is fostering respectful dialogue? Another way to phrase the question is, if you could give advice, right, to someone listening, maybe they are terrible at these things. Maybe they find themselves getting so mad when they're having good conversations with people that, maybe their viewpoints are just disgusting to another person, right? What advice could you give people? Because I find in my experience in a university classroom, my level of comfort to disagree is often contingent on the professor, right? So, if it's contingent on the professor for a lot of students, what could you do as a teacher, as an educator, to foster a more open space in the classroom?
I think it's setting up a place where it's okay to disagree. I think that's something you build, especially in universities that in the first week, sometimes you're not going to even know your colleagues. Sometimes you're not going to even know the professor. If it's something that you continually like push students to do, and just share their honest opinions. Like in with undergrads, a way to do that, it's like, wow, let's do some like anonymous types of like quiz for them to start feeling like, okay, here I can say whatever I want. They won't know it's me. And then you start like building that process. Because of course, going the first day and saying like, wow, what do you think about this very top controversial topic? Like it's not gonna work. I saw that. It doesn't work. Um, but for me, I think it's so important to acknowledge that there's space for us to have difficult conversations. It's something that I try to do. Topics that I punish myself for even talking about because they're politically incorrect and I shouldn't be even thinking about it and talking about it. I allowed myself to have those conversations and get my knowledge and insights from other people, and then once you go out there and you actually do that, it gets easier with time. So getting exposed to people that don't necessarily agree with you, so I think that's something that we need to do, because just as Emily said, when you're in an environment that everyone agrees with, saying yes to everything you say, once you go out there and you see someone that's totally disagree with you, you're gonna go crazy. You're like, why? Like, how dare you to do that? So this is a problem, being in an environment where everyone agrees with you. So if you go out there, expose yourself to other types of things, it will get easier over time. And honestly, you're gonna get better at like even defending your ideas because you're gonna know what the other side is thinking, and you're gonna learn from them. And once you find someone like that disagrees, you're gonna know how to debate them, and you're gonna know how to promote your what you believe that it's right, even if the other person doesn't agree with you.
I agree, and I also think that, especially in a classroom, it's really important to like, humanize other people. I think it's really easy to dismiss someone just because, like, they have different perspectives than you. But if you think like, "Oh, if this person was my sibling, if this person was my cousin, and they had a different perspective," like, obviously, you're not gonna well, maybe not obviously, but in most scenarios, you're not gonna be like, "You can't be a part of my family, you can't be around me, you can't come to my wedding because we have different perspectives." So I think that's something that's really hard to, like, get in a classroom, probably impossible in a classroom, but, like, what somebody could do is you split people off in pairs because in big colleges, you have, like, 50 plus people in a classroom, and if you're all discussing together, not one person's gonna speak up because somebody with a bigger voice has a different perspective. If it's 2 people, you're putting a face to the person that you disagree with, just like what you're doing with this podcast, then it's gonna be more likely for them to see them as another person, not just an idea.
And honestly, just get more creative with assignments and ways for you to, just like Emily was saying, to make people connect. So instead of with this very like boring essay that undergrads are like, they don't want to do it, like it's not interesting, send them to like interview people on campus. Like if we're talking about, what do you think about democracy as we were discussing here for a couple of minutes? Send them in like a group project. Go on campus, talk to people that are not into poli sci at all, and ask them, and then come and present your results. This is research. This is a way for you to educate people. And then when you're interviewing someone, at least in the best case scenario, you won't fight them. You want to get the information from them. You're not gonna be like putting them in a hard position. I think we need to be creative and pushing students to also do that because they're kids. They don't know exactly how it is to be like a citizen. They're and actually universities still learn that. So I think it's also on our side to see like how can we extract the best of them. And with poli sci, there's a lot of challenges, as but I do think there are ways. It just be a little bit more creative.
Great answers. Excellent answers. I have left this conversation being more hopeful for the future of education and universities. Um, Real quick, I want to touch upon two things you said because I think they're important. One thing that you said, Emily, you touched on, you had a little bit in there where you talked about, well, I hope people aren't, excommunicating family or cousins because they have a different perspective. This is actually something that public opinion is finding to be on the rise. Not only the excommunication of family members, which is more common than we think, but also, interestingly enough, when surveyed about whether they'd be comfortable with their son or their daughter marrying someone of the opposite political ideology, more and more, an alarming percentage of Americans are starting to say, we're not okay with that, which is a scary sign. And then one thing you said, Bruna, that was absolutely relatable to my life, you were talking about when you first enter university as a freshman and you see someone disagree, it's infectious, right? Because you all of a sudden, you're like, whoa, what did I just witness? And you're like, I can do that too. I can do that too. And so if I were to add my 2 cents into this, it's that for anyone who's listening to this who is a bit scared to disagree for fear of social outcasting, you'll find your people. And that maybe those people won't even be people who agree with you, but the people who favor open dialogue, free speech, and respect, you'll find them. Anyone who's willing to outcast you because you disagree, they aren't it. One final question I would like to ask both of you. to leave the audience with is if you could basically summarize everything that we've talked about in this conversation, which we've talked about everything from academia, the state of global democracy, to the state of free speech on college campuses. If you could leave the audience with one word, one thought, one rant, what would that be?
Um, I think it's challenging to be a human being now, um, for different reasons. But I do think we need to play our part, uh, by talking to others, by being better professionals, as we were discussing, be better political scientists, be better at dialogue. There are ways for us, even if it's challenging, like we are not very optimistic about the future, as generally speaking. I think there are ways for us to find um, there are ways for us to find like connections that we can make, ways that we can impact others' lives, and help pushing this idea that we can learn with each other, by being in this podcast, talking to people, by being in the classroom, by allowing these conversations to happen with our friends, with our families, not blocking someone on Instagram because I saw that they don't necessarily, that doesn't like resonate with me. I think with this very like small steps, one day, like day by day, I think we at least we can live a better life. Perhaps the impact won't be as big, but we can be a little bit happier as a person.
So kind, Bruna. I am kind of like on a similar train of thought. I think that if anyone takes anything away from the conversation we've had today, I hope that they take away that like it's okay to put yourself in situations that you're not necessarily comfortable in. Like in a classroom, like make yourself uncomfortable, make yourself speak out. In day-to-day life when you're talking to your family and your friends or some random peer on the train or in McDonald's, like speak out because I think that people will surprise you and you might surprise yourself. And honestly, that's something I feel like I have to work on every day because I have a difficult time, putting myself out there in some situations. But I think that the more that you practice being uncomfortable, the easier it's going to come to you. And the better, hopefully, the world will be.
Wow. I say this with, I don't say this just to say this. You two are shining examples of what not only academia can look like, but also just what human beings should look like in an age where we are so divided and so polarized via identity versus via policy, via whatever medium. You two are shining examples of how to engage with one another and still walk away from a conversation with that intent to treat people like human beings. So thank you both so much for coming on. And if you're listening to this as, these two continue on in their professional careers and they get great publications in scholarly journals, make sure you read them, follow their work. And as always, if you are listening to this, I ask that you treat our guests with the presumption of grace, peace, love, and understanding to those we disagree with. Don't assume that the people you disagree with are coming from the worst of places. Instead, assume they're coming from a human place. Bruna, Emily, it's been wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
again, thank you for doing this. Um, Thank you for the words, the kind words, but I also wanted to highlight how important this project is. And it's an honor for me to be a part of it. So keep doing it. You're changing a lot of things, and I'm very very proud of
Yeah, I feel like we just need to take a second to hype you up because you're so good at like treating other people with respect. It's the whole reason that you can have this whole podcast.
you.
So I think that just like being able to connect with people is a skill that not very many people have. And you are very, very good at it. And I think that this podcast will go very, very far. And I'm proud that Bruna and I are like the two people here that are here to help you on your journey.
This platform only works because of you. not because of me. It works because people are willing to come on and participate. And so, because it only works of you, and because I am the mediator here, I get the final word to say that although I appreciate those kind words, let's give a shout out to our wonderful guests. Thank you so much.